The 1950s were sold to us as an ideal, a golden age. Men came home from work, women had their hair perfectly set, children were obedient. Dinner was on the table at 6 o'clock precisely. The house was clean. The wife was grateful. Everything was calm and orderly and right. But if you looked closer, if you looked at what was actually happening in those houses behind closed doors, you found something else entirely. You found women whose hands shook constantly, women who couldn't remember if they'd already told their husband something or if they'd only thought about telling him, women who were constantly apologizing for things they didn't think they'd done wrong, women who were beginning to believe they were going insane. The 1950s husband, at least the 1950s husband who was abusive, was a master of a particular form of psychological manipulation. He was a master of gaslighting, and he had institutional backup. He had doctors, priests, and judges all telling his wife that she was the problem, that her emotions were irrational, that her perceptions were unreliable, that her mind was simply too weak to handle the complexities of adult life. The 1950s perfected gaslighting. It created a system in which a man could make his wife believe she was crazy, and she had no way to verify that she wasn't, because the entire world was backing up his narrative. What makes this so terrifying to examine is not that it happened in the 1950s, it's that it's still happening. The mechanisms are identical, the tools are the same. A man, or a woman, or anyone in a position of power over someone else can make you doubt your own reality, can make you believe your perceptions are faulty, can make you paranoid about your own mind. And the truly insidious part is that gaslighting doesn't require physical abuse. It doesn't require visible marks. It doesn't require anything that looks wrong from the outside. It just requires a perpetrator who is willing to systematically convince you that you cannot trust yourself. This is the story of how the 1950s husband taught the world to gaslight, and how those lessons are still being taught today. Her name was Dorothy Mitchell, and in 1952, at 22 years old, she thought she was marrying a man she loved. She met Robert at a church social. He was handsome, well-dressed, employed. He had a good job at an insurance company. He said he loved her after 3 months of dating. He asked her to marry him. She said yes. They were married in the spring. The first year was fine. Robert was attentive when they went out in public. He was cordial to her friends. He provided for her. He did not hit her. By the standards of the 1950s, by the standards most women knew, he was a good husband. But something was wrong. Dorothy couldn't articulate what. It was like living in a house where everything was slightly off-kilter, where nothing quite made sense, where reality seemed to shift depending on Robert's mood. The first incident happened in the summer of 1953. Dorothy's best friend Margaret came over for coffee. They sat in the living room and talked about their days. Margaret mentioned that she'd run into Robert at the grocery store on Monday. Dorothy said she didn't know he'd gone to the grocery store on Monday. He'd told her he was working late. When Robert came home, Dorothy mentioned this casually. She said, "Margaret said she saw you at the grocery store on Monday. I didn't know you'd gone." Robert's response was immediate and certain. He said he hadn't been to the grocery store on Monday. He'd been working late. He said Dorothy must have misunderstood Margaret. He said Margaret probably saw someone who looked like him. He said Dorothy shouldn't trust her memory because she was often confused about details. Dorothy believed him. Margaret probably had been mistaken. She probably had misunderstood. She was always forgetting things. Robert was right. She was confused. But then Margaret called the next day and asked what Robert had said about being at the grocery store. Dorothy realized that she remembered the conversation correctly. Robert had lied. She had been right the first time. When she brought this up to Robert, he told her something that would echo through the rest of her marriage. "Dorothy, you're making things up. You're becoming paranoid. I would never lie to you. If you don't trust me, it says something about your mental health." He said she was becoming paranoid. It happened so fast. One moment she was a reasonable person, the next moment she was paranoid. It was his word against her perception, and his word won. This was the beginning. Over the next 5 years, Robert developed a system. He would deny things Dorothy distinctly remembered him saying. He would insist that conversations hadn't happened the way she recalled them. He would tell her that she was too emotional to remember accurately. He would suggest that her hormones were affecting her mental faculties. Dorothy began to keep a secret journal. She wrote down conversations. She wrote down what he'd said. She was trying to verify her own reality because she couldn't trust her own mind anymore. Robert found the journal. He read it. When he confronted her, he told her that keeping the journal was proof she was having a mental breakdown. He said that obsessively writing down conversations to prove he'd said things was paranoid behavior. He said that a healthy woman wouldn't feel the need to document everything he said. He said she needed to see a doctor. Dorothy saw a doctor. She told him she was worried about her memory. She didn't tell him about Robert's denials. The doctor, a man who accepted the 1950s ideology that women's minds were inherently unstable, told her that many women experience nervous disorders. He prescribed her tranquilizers. He suggested she might benefit from consulting with a psychiatrist. The tranquilizers made her foggy. Her memory actually did become less reliable. This was exactly what Robert needed. Now, when she tried to confront him about something he'd said, she couldn't remember exactly when he'd said it or what the exact words were. The tranquilizers had made her uncertain. Robert could point to this uncertainty as evidence that she was unwell. "You see," he'd say, "you can't even remember if something happened yesterday or last week. Your mind is not reliable. Why would you trust your perception over mine?" By 1957, Dorothy was convinced she was going insane. She didn't trust her own mind. When Robert said he hadn't promised to take her to her sister's for Thanksgiving, she believed him, even though she distinctly remembered him saying he would. She assumed her memory was faulty. She assumed her perception was wrong. She assumed Robert, who was a reliable man with a reliable job and a reliable reputation, was more trustworthy than her own mind. She began to have panic attacks. Her doctor prescribed more tranquilizers. She began to withdraw from her friends because she was embarrassed about how confused she was. Robert told her this withdrawal was proof that she was mentally unstable. He said that isolated women became paranoid and that she needed to stay home where he could monitor her well-being. By 1958, Dorothy was completely isolated, completely medicated, and completely convinced that she was mentally ill. Robert had not laid a hand on her. He had simply made her doubt everything about herself. This would continue for 32 years. Dorothy would try to leave Robert twice, but both times he'd threaten to have her institutionalized. He'd cite her psychiatric history. He'd say no court would give custody of their children to a mentally unstable woman. He'd say it would be his word against hers. And who would believe a paranoid woman? She stayed. She stayed until Robert died in 1990. Only after his death would Dorothy begin the long process of recovering her own reality, of realizing that she had never been mentally ill, of understanding that her perceptions had been correct all along. She had been systematically gaslit by a man who was backed up by the entire 1950s establishment, by doctors, by priests, by cultural narratives that told women their minds were unreliable. What happened to Dorothy Mitchell happened to millions of 1950s wives. The 1950s had created the perfect infrastructure for gaslighting, a culture that already believed women's minds were unreliable, combined with medical systems that would pathologize resistance, combined with isolation that prevented women from reality testing their experiences. The 5 core gaslighting patterns that trapped Dorothy are patterns that continue to trap people today. Let's identify them. Red flag. Number 1, reality denial. That never happened. Historical version. Robert's most basic gaslighting technique was simple denial. Dorothy said something happened. Robert said it didn't. He said it so confidently, so completely, that Dorothy's own memory began. to seem less reliable than his certainty. In the 1950s, this was particularly effective because cultural narratives already supported the idea that men's memories were more reliable than women's memories. A man's word carried weight. A woman's memory was considered suspect. Robert would deny conversations that Dorothy distinctly remembered. He would deny promises he'd made. He would deny his own tone of voice, his own expressions, his own stated intentions. And Dorothy would be left wondering, did he really say this? Or did I imagine it? Am I remembering a fantasy I had rather than something that actually happened? Psychology. This is called reality denial, or gaslighting by denying events. The perpetrator denies that something happened, and by doing so consistently, they make the victim question their own memory and perception. The brain is vulnerable to this because memory is actually malleable. If someone insists repeatedly that something didn't happen the way you remember it, your brain will begin to second-guess itself. If this denial is paired with cultural narratives that support the idea that your memory is unreliable, the effect is devastating. Modern equivalent. Today, this looks like someone who says, "I never said that," even though you clearly remember them saying it. It looks like someone who denies conversations you had with them. It looks like someone who says, "That's not what I meant," and insists on a different interpretation of words they clearly spoke. It looks like a situation where you say, "You promised me you'd be home by 8," and they say, "I never promised that. You're making things up." It looks like someone who systematically denies events that actually happened. It looks like social media screenshots where people deny having said things that are literally visible on the screen. It looks like someone saying, "I don't remember saying that, so it must not be that important." The mechanism is to make the victim doubt their own memory by persistently denying reality. Red flag number 2, countering. You're misremembering. Historical version. After Robert's initial denials, his technique evolved. He didn't just deny things happened. He countered Dorothy's memories with alternative narratives. When Dorothy said he'd told her something, Robert would say, "No, what actually happened is," and then provide a completely different version of events. He'd present his alternative narrative so confidently that Dorothy would become confused. Did she remember it one way, or did he tell her a different version? Had he really said what she thought he said, or was she mixing up different conversations? This countering was particularly effective when combined with Dorothy's increasing self-doubt. As Dorothy became more uncertain of her own mind, she became more willing to accept Robert's counter-narrative. His version of events seemed more coherent, more detailed, more plausible, especially because he delivered it with complete confidence. Psychology. This is called countering, responding to the victim's reality with a competing narrative designed to create doubt. The perpetrator doesn't just deny, they provide an alternative explanation. This is particularly effective when the perpetrator's narrative is detailed and consistent. The victim is forced to choose between two different versions of reality, and if they already doubt themselves, they'll often choose the perpetrator's version because it comes from someone they trust. Modern equivalent. Today, this looks like someone who responds to your memory with, "No, what actually happened was," followed by a completely different version of events. It looks like a partner who consistently rewrites history. "I never said we'd go on vacation. I said we might go if things work out financially." It looks like a workplace situation where a manager tells you that a meeting went differently than you remember. "No, we discussed promoting someone else. You misunderstood what I was saying." It looks like someone who is so confident in their counter-narrative that it makes you question which version is true. It looks like gaslighting through revision rather than simple denial. The mechanism is to make the victim uncertain by providing competing narratives. Red flag number 3, trivializing. You're being oversensitive. Historical version. When Dorothy tried to express concern about Robert's lies, when she tried to tell him that his denials were making her question her sanity, Robert would trivialize her concerns. He'd tell her she was being oversensitive. He'd tell her that she was overreacting. He'd tell her that a reasonable woman wouldn't be upset about these small misunderstandings. He was particularly effective at this because the 1950s narrative already positioned women as oversensitive and emotionally irrational. A woman who was upset was a woman who was being hysterical. A woman who was concerned was a woman who was neurotic. By trivializing Dorothy's concerns, Robert made her feel foolish for having them. She began to believe that any upset she felt was a personal failing, not a response to his behavior. She internalized the message that her emotions were the problem, not his lies. Psychology. This is called trivializing, minimizing the victim's concerns and emotional responses. The perpetrator tells the victim that their concerns are not valid, not important, not worth discussing. This is psychologically effective because it attacks the victim's right to their own emotional response. It tells them that their feelings are inappropriate, which makes them doubt whether they have a right to feel what they're feeling. Modern equivalent. Today, this looks like someone who responds to your concerns with, "You're being too sensitive," or "You're overreacting," or "That's not a big deal." It looks like someone who dismisses your emotional response as inappropriate. It looks like a situation where you say, "I'm upset that you forgot my birthday." And they say, "Why are you making such a big deal out of this? Most people don't care about birthdays." It looks like a workplace where concerns about discrimination are dismissed as oversensitivity. It looks like someone saying, "You're too emotional about this," as a way to shut down legitimate concerns. The mechanism is to make the victim doubt whether their feelings are justified. Red flag number 4, diversion. Why are you always bringing up the past? Historical version. Whenever Dorothy tried to confront Robert about his lies, Robert would change the subject. He would deflect. He would accuse her of always bringing up the past. He would say that a good wife would focus on the present, on being appreciative of what he provided, rather than dwelling on old grievances. This was incredibly effective because it prevented any actual discussion of his behavior. Dorothy would try to address his gaslighting, and Robert would make her the problem for bringing it up. She became afraid to address anything, because bringing it up would result in Robert making her feel worse about herself. Psychology. This is called diversion or deflection. When confronted with their behavior, the perpetrator changes the subject and makes the victim's act of bringing up the issue the problem, rather than the original issue. This prevents conflict resolution because it prevents the actual conflict from ever being discussed. The victim learns that raising concerns only results in more blame, so they stop raising concerns. Modern equivalent. Today, this looks like someone who responds to a concern with, "Why are you always bringing this up?" Or, "I can't believe you're still upset about that." Or, "You're so negative, always focusing on problems." It looks like a situation where you try to address something hurtful someone did, and instead of addressing it, they make you feel bad for bringing it up. It looks like someone saying, "We were having a good day until you ruined it by bringing this up." It looks like a workplace where someone raises concerns about mistreatment and is told, "You're always complaining," rather than having their concern addressed. The mechanism is to prevent the original issue from being discussed by making the victim's act of discussion the problem. Red flag number 5, symptom spotting. You need professional help. Historical version. The most devastating gaslighting technique Robert used was encouraging Dorothy to seek psychiatric help. Not because she needed it, but because psychiatric help reinforced his narrative. When a woman was told she was mentally ill, when doctors gave her a diagnosis, when she was medicated, it all served to confirm Robert's story that Dorothy's perceptions were faulty. Doctors in the 1950s were predisposed to diagnose women with mental illness. A woman who complained about her husband was experiencing nervous tension. A woman who was forgetful was experiencing mental fatigue. A woman who was paranoid was experiencing female hysteria. By getting Dorothy professional validation for her mental illness, Robert had an institutional backup for his gaslighting. It wasn't just his word against hers anymore, it was a doctor's word too. Psychology. This is called symptom spotting, or pathologizing the victim. The perpetrator encourages the victim to seek professional help, and when the victim gets a diagnosis that seems to confirm the perpetrator's narrative, it becomes harder for the victim to argue that they're being abused. This is particularly effective in eras or cultures where mental illness is deeply stigmatized. The victim becomes more afraid of being labeled mentally ill than of continuing to be abused. Modern equivalent. Today, this looks like someone who tells you, maybe you should talk to a therapist about your anxiety, or you need to get on medication, or I think you have trust issues you need to work through, in response to concerns about their behavior. It looks like someone who pathologizes legitimate concerns about their behavior. It looks like someone who makes mental health treatment the problem, rather than their own actions. It looks like a situation where legitimate concerns about abuse are reframed as the victim's mental health issue. It looks like someone saying, your therapist should be helping you understand that your reactions to me are disproportionate. It looks like someone using therapy language to justify continuing to hurt you. It looks like using psychology as a weapon rather than as healing. The mechanism is to make the victim believe they're mentally ill rather than being abused. 16R19 Why patterns endure. 500 words. Transition. The distorted 1950s image gradually transforms into a contemporary setting. The kitchen becomes a bedroom, an office, a dating app. The same patterns repeat. The clock keeps ticking. The woman keeps questioning her own reality. The infrastructure changes, but the mechanism remains. Dorothy Mitchell lived her entire married life convinced that she was mentally ill. She was medicated. She was isolated. She was completely under Robert's psychological control. But here's what's crucial to understand. Robert didn't invent gaslighting in the 1950s. Gaslighting is ancient. What the 1950s did was create an institutional infrastructure that made gaslighting devastatingly effective. The 1950s had several things that made gaslighting work particularly well. A culture that already believed women's minds were unreliable, a medical system that would validate the perpetrator's narrative, isolation that prevented reality testing, and stigma around mental illness that made the victim terrified of being labeled mentally ill. That infrastructure no longer exists in the exact same form. Women aren't automatically assumed to be hysterical anymore. We have more access to information. We have more independence. And yet gaslighting persists. Why? Because gaslighting doesn't require that specific infrastructure. Gaslighting requires only two things: a perpetrator willing to deny reality and a victim vulnerable to self-doubt. And those two things exist in every era, in every culture, in every relationship dynamic, where there's an imbalance of power. The mechanism has remained exactly the same for decades. Make the victim doubt their own reality. Make them question their perception. Make them believe their mind is faulty. Make them dependent on the perpetrator's narrative. Make them so afraid of being wrong that they stop trusting themselves entirely. What's changed is the camouflage. In the 1950s, gaslighting was wrapped in medical authority and cultural narratives about women's hysteria. Today, gaslighting is often wrapped in therapy language, in psychology, in the language of wellness and mental health. A perpetrator today is more likely to say, "You have attachment trauma," than "You're hysterical," but the mechanism is identical. They're using language that sounds educated and sophisticated to justify their abuse. What makes this particularly dangerous is that therapy and psychology are genuinely valuable. But when they're weaponized, when they're used to pathologize legitimate concerns about being abused, they become tools of oppression. The 1950s showed us that gaslighting doesn't need to look like gaslighting to be devastating. It can look like a husband concerned about his wife's mental health. It can look like institutions backing up the perpetrator's narrative. It can look like the victim slowly losing the ability to trust themselves. The patterns endure because gaslighting is fundamentally effective. It works on something core to human psychology: our need to make sense of the world, our vulnerability to uncertainty, our tendency to trust authority figures. And as long as that's true, as long as humans are vulnerable to self-doubt, as long as there are power imbalances in relationships, as long as there are people willing to exploit those vulnerabilities, gaslighting will persist. The only defense is awareness. The only protection is learning to recognize gaslighting when it happens. The only salvation is learning to trust your own reality, even when it's being systematically denied. Dorothy Mitchell died in 2003, having spent most of her life believing she was mentally ill when she was actually being abused. She eventually recovered. In the last decade of her life, after Robert died, Dorothy did the work of recovering her own reality. She stopped taking the medications that had made her foggy. She reconnected with old friends. She realized that her perceptions had been correct all along. She had never been crazy, but she spent 61 years believing she was. Here's what you can tell yourself that Dorothy couldn't. Here's what you know that she didn't have access to. Your perception of reality is valid. Your memory is reliable. Your feelings are justified. And if someone is systematically telling you that these things are wrong, they are gaslighting you. This is revolutionary to say. In the 1950s, saying this would have gotten you institutionalized. Even now, saying this can result in being told you're overreacting or being too sensitive. But it's true. You know your own mind better than anyone else. You know what you remember. You know what you felt. You know what was said to you. Trust that. Protect that. Never let anyone convince you that your own reality is faulty. If someone tells you that you're misremembering repeatedly, trust yourself. If someone tells you that you're being oversensitive, trust your emotions. If someone tells you that you need professional help because you're concerned about their behavior, that's a red flag. Here's the test. Is this person willing to take responsibility for how their behavior affects you? Or are they insisting that the problem is your perception, your memory, your mental health? If they're willing to take responsibility, you might have a healthy relationship that needs repair. If they're insisting the problem is you, then you're being gaslighted. And if you're being gaslighted, you need to know this: you're not crazy. Your mind is not faulty. The 1950s husband and the contemporary gaslighter are counting on you not believing yourself. They're counting on you being so doubtful of your own reality that you won't leave. Don't give them that power. Trust yourself completely, absolutely, without reservation. Your reality is real, your memory is valid, and you deserve to be with people who believe you.